I thought you said you'd never leave New York. And I thought you'd be dead by now.
When a feisty 80-year-old pharmacist from Brooklyn retires to a senior community in Florida,
the last time she'd seen him, she was 18 years old, young and trusting and deeply in love.
She encounters the man who broke her heart decades earlier.
The smile he gave transported her back to the first day they met in her father's drugstore.
Can she make peace with the past and find love again?
I love for you to see yourself and to see your family in my character.
The Love Elixir of Augusta Stern is a story of second chances, and it's the CBS New York Book Club's Reader's Choice.
Right now, CBS New York's Book Club with Mary Calvi.
Hello and welcome to our meetup about a book that some in our club say was one of our best reads yet. We focus on fiction connected to the tri-state area in their plots or authors. We got together recently with some of our readers, talk about the novel, The Love Elixir of Augustas Stern. Thousands of you voted to make it our reader's choice. We're going to talk to the author, Lynda Cohen Loigman, about it coming up. And book club producer Danielle Parker will show questions and comments from our readers during the show. Hey, Danielle.
Hi, Mary. I am so excited because there are some books that resonate, whether it's because of the plot or the characters or even depending on your mood. Well, The Love Elixir of Augustas Stern hit home for our readers.
This is probably one of my favorite books that we've read in the book club, and I've been with the book club since the beginning.
I thought it was a great book because it empowered women in science, and I'm a scientist.
I just think it was a very refreshing perspective for it to be an 80-year-old female.
There was an awful lot of loss in the book, and it shows that people just have to go on.
I just like the sense of humor too. So it was heartwarming, but it's parts where it laugh out loud.
Yeah, it was funny. In fact, one of our readers loved the line that Irving says to Augusta, "I'd know that took us anywhere." The book also has intrigue, heartbreak, and jealousy. I mean, there's so much to talk about, Mary.
Yeah, there sure is. I'm really excited about the next half hour. And People magazine called the book full of sweetness and charm, and I wanted to learn more about the person who created the world of Augustas Stern. And what I find out is just like her book, The Love Elixir of Augustas Stern, the author too is full of sweetness and charm. Nestled in the New York City neighborhood of Greenwich Village is an apothecary that's been around longer than any other in the country. This is it. The oldest pharmacy in the country.
I know, it's a fantastic setting.
C.O. Bigelow, a perfect spot to speak with author Lynda Cohen Loigman. This place is a piece of New York City history, established in the year 1838 when pharmacists would mix their own formulas with herbs and tinctures to cure ills. And that's where our author comes in her latest novel, The Love Elixir of Augustas Stern. She delves into the love life of an 80-year-old pharmacist.
This time, for Augusta's benefit, she whispered the names of her ingredients: pomegranate seeds, black cohosh, stinging nettle, raspberry leaves, viburnum. The spicy aroma of licorice root hit the back of Augusta's nostrils.
The book has garnered praise from across the nation and Club Calvi's readers, who voted it as our reader's choice. Your book is so wonderful because it really takes us into this pharmacist world, and I really enjoyed kind of getting to know her and figuring out who she was and what she was going to do.
Well, she says whatever she wants to say, and she takes no prisoners.
A multitude of scents swirled around them: ginger and garlic, rosemary and yarrow, cinnamon and horehound, lemon and hyssop. There were other scents, too, for things she could not think to name. Augusta shut her eyes, and when she opened them, the scents in the room shifted yet again, smelling now of solace, of something wholesome and strong.
It's not an actual love potion, and I think that's important. You can't really make anyone fall in love with someone else, right? So you want the potion to do something else, give you some other clue as to what you might be feeling. And so Augustas Elixir really is special because it gives clarity.
We were invited into the archives of C.O. Bigelow, where potions abound, and we spoke about how the world of Augustas Stern was born.
She has a lot of my grandmother in her. My grandmother Tilly was like a very strong woman, like Augusta, and she didn't have much of a filter like Augusta doesn't. You know, Augusta's sort of, you know, back and forth with Irving sometimes can get a little contentious.
She says what she wants to say.
Yep, she says exactly what she wants to say.
Please tell me how you decided to put author in your title, and how did that happen? How did that come about?
Well, I was a lawyer for many years. I never really liked being a lawyer, I have to say. I was a trust and estates lawyer, so what I loved about that were all of the family stories and the family drama and the family infighting and all the intrigue, and what I didn't like was the actual law. Like, you know, I should have known right away that the things that I was interested in had nothing to do with the law. But I was a lawyer for almost 10 years, and then I did a couple other things, but I always had this idea for a story, which became The Two-Family House. When my daughter was 6 months old, I thought of that story.
The Two-Family House saw national success, which was followed by The Wartime Sisters, The Matchmaker's Gift, and now The Love Elixir.
Words can do anything, she said. A kind word can fix a person's spirit. A cruel one can break a person's heart. Wicked words have caused wars, and honest words have made peace. Why shouldn't they be able to heal?
In your books, too, there's also this sense of resiliency, too. And I think that there's this beautiful theme that carries through that, you know, no matter what people are going through, and they read your book and they realize they can keep going and they can carry on. And I think that's a really important piece for readers to take with them.
You can have tragedy or heartache in your life and you can still go on. So that's what you're saying, where the resiliency comes from.
Lynda Cohen Loigman, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, we're so excited that you're the Reader's Choice. So a big congrats.
Thank you.
On all of that and all of your success with this book. I mean, one best-selling author said that you make them just so happy. They're just happy in that world that you create for them. And, you know, that is the power of your writing, because as we turn the page, we just become very comfortable in each of their worlds. And in this latest with Augustas Stern, I'm wondering for you, what was that like creating this wonderful character?
Well, that's such a kind thing to say, because I love to build a world for readers that they can sink themselves into. This book was a lot of fun to write. I have to say, the whole pharmacy world, you know, you and I were lucky enough to go and see one of the oldest pharmacies in the country. Building that world was so interesting, to find out about all the ingredients, to find out about the role of a pharmacist in the early communities, because they were the first people that people went to when they were feeling ill, you know, instead of a doctor.
So at the center of the story is that 80-year-old retired pharmacist.
Yes.
She has a sharp wit, she's plucky, she's smart, but she's also in need of a second chance at love. So we really get to understand her as an 80-year-old, but also as a youngster. So it's really quite fascinating for you to develop this storyline and really bring us back to Brooklyn in the 1920s.
Yeah.
That must have been kind of a really great assignment for you. What a journey.
It was, you know, well, this is a dual timeline novel, as you know, alluded to. So we are in 1920s Brooklyn, and then we're in 1980s Boca Raton. And both settings offered so much to play with, so much fun. Augusta is a fantastic character to write. You can really dig deep with her. She's strong, she's interesting, she says what's on her mind. But when the story opens, she's really shut herself off, not just to love, but just to the magic of the world around her.
Speaking of magic, there's quite a bit of magic that plays out throughout the book. We're going to talk about that throughout the show. But how did you decide on the dual timeline for our heroine and those two locations? Why Brooklyn and then Boca Raton, which was so much fun, by the way.
Well, so my husband's great-grandmother was a pharmacist. She graduated from pharmacy school in 1921, and she had a store in New York, but her store was not in Brooklyn. But my mother grew up in Brooklyn, in Brownsville, and I decided I would sort of meld the two things, and I decided to use Brooklyn. And the 1920s, partly because my husband's great-grandmother grew up then, partly because it was Prohibition, such an interesting time for pharmacies, because you could get a prescription for whiskey, you know, 1 pint every 10 days for medicinal purposes.
Really? How about that?
Yeah, really fascinating. And then partly just, I just loved the world of the pharmacy back then. It was a really interesting time. The later timeline always flows from the first one because you can't have a character that lives till 120. You know, you have to set a limit on it. So the 80s followed from the 1920s, and I chose Boca because honestly, the other part of this story was inspired by my dad, moving my dad to assisted living when he was in his 80s, and that was in Boca Raton. And so I chose to just sort of use that setting.
How special to bring so much of your life and allow readers to be a part of that. So it's really quite beautiful. We have so many questions from our book club members, so I want to get back to Danielle Parker and hear what the readers have to say.
The readers have a lot to say, Mary and Lynda. Our first question is about Great Aunt Esther. She comes to live with Augusta's family in Brooklyn after Augusta's mother dies in 1922. So Esther brings not only her love, but also her knowledge of making remedies using herbs that she crushes in a mortar and pestle, which fascinated our book club member named Joe.
Mortar and pestle with the phrase on it. I was wondering if that was actually something she found or how she came up with the phrase that was on the mortar and pestle. Was actually an artifact she found, or was that a phrase she just liked and used?
That's a question for you. We'd love to know. What about that one?
Yeah, so first of all, the idea for having words inside the mortar and pestle came right out of my research. I read something about these things called incantation bowls that were buried beneath homes in what's now Iran and Iraq, and they were like made between 600 and 800 AD, and they had spells and incantations inside them. They were buried beneath homes to protect people. They were like protection spells. And when I read about that and the idea of words inside a bowl, I thought I wanted to put that inside of Esther's mortar.
Well, it really is fascinating when we talk about this because you're really bringing up so many ingredients in this book. There's so much about the apothecaries from way back when. Anything else that stood out to you that you were like, I have to get this into the manuscript?
There was a cure for like a menopause kind of cure. It was called like Lydia Pinkham's, like, I forget the whole name of it, Lydia Pinkham's cure for maladies. I mean, there were just a lot of really interesting, funny, natural, we don't really know what was in them, but these medicines and things that were advertised back then.
Isn't it fascinating when you go back in the research? I went back and did a lot of research in the 1700s and the 1800s, and some things that I was quite fascinating about was the way they would take medications and talk about them in a very magical way in a bit. You know, there were always potions when I remember learning about them, and here we're talking about the love potion. So you really brought that into your book.
It is funny that they use those words. I hadn't really thought about that before, but they did use words like elixir and potion. And I mean, you're right, it's really magical language for what was probably just like maybe chalk powder in a bottle that they were selling.
Exactly.
You know,
add a little lavender to it.
Yeah, exactly.
Danielle has some additional questions for us, so I just wanted to get back over because the readers, I want to give them a chance to ask instead of me just talking.
We love it though, because there's so much to talk about. A half hour just won't do it. But Mary and Lynda, readers love the dual timelines in the book that you talked about. 1920 Brownsville, Brooklyn, and 1987 Florida. And they thought each place came alive through the specific details in the book. And Cindy wanted to know about Lynda's work to get those settings just right.
Question is, how long did it take for you to do all of the research? I read in the author's note that there was an extensive amount of reading and time put in. I was just curious to know how long that process actually took.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by this too. So how long did the research take, and then how about the writing?
I researched for about 3 months for this book. And that was sort of front-loaded, so I researched before I ever started writing. And the research took me in a lot of different directions. So there was I read memoirs of pharmacists back then. I interviewed pharmacists, the oldest pharmacists that I could find. I read about Brownsville. There were a lot of books about Brownsville in the early days and just sort of the way that whole community developed. There's a little gangster through line in the story, so there were books about gangsters and specifically Jewish gangsters in Brooklyn back then. And then there was all the research about homeopathic cures, natural cures, research about magic and Jewish folklore and all of these other things. So that took about 3 months. And then the writing, about a year.
Did you know Augusta was going to be your heroine from the very beginning, or was it the love elixir that was the primary reason to get started?
It was Augusta. Yeah. In fact, in the beginning, I knew that there would have to be some primary sort of potion or something that she would be making. That would be a mistake. Something would have to go wrong. But in the beginning, I didn't want it to be anything to do with love. I didn't want it to be a love elixir because I had just written my book, The Matchmaker's Gift, and I didn't want to, that was, it sounds very romantic, right? Matchmaker's Gift. And I really want my historical readers to know that I'm still writing about history. I don't want them to think that I'm just veering off into just romance. And so I didn't want it to be, but I actually found this great short story by O. Henry called The Love Philter of Ike Schonstein, which is I would encourage anybody to read it. You can find it in a lot of different places. And it's a fun story about a pharmacist, and it had a love potion, and it had so much humor and so many wonderful details. And when I read that short story, I thought, first of all, I love the title, and my title is an homage to that title. But also I thought, well, there's no bigger potion than a love potion. It has to have something to do with love.
I really adore it, and I love elixir too. I think that was a really perfect way to describe it. There's so much more to come with Lynda Cohen Loigman after the break, but before we head to break, a look inside the world of an apothecary from Alec Ginsberg, whose family owns C.O. Bigelow.
Some of this stuff you can still see there's product in there, God knows what, but this is some sort of tincture from the 1800s. This is an ingredient that they would use. And if you walk into our pharmacy now, you've been in a pharmacy, it's just plastic bottles with, labels on them. It doesn't look like this. And when you walk into a pharmacy, this is what would be behind you, 100 years ago, which is beautiful. These are real authentic stuff from, I would say, the early 1900s.
Have a favorite character or somebody who just struck something in you?
I like the characters in the condo down in Florida. Vera, that's what it's like down there. I mean, my parents, my ex-mother-in-law, they're all gossips down by the pool, in everybody's business, and I enjoyed that part of it.
That's what they're like down there. It's so funny. So let's gossip about the gossiping characters. How fun to create this wonderful community in Boca Raton.
Yeah, it was really fun. I loved writing Irving's character because Irving uses humor, to sort of guard against and protect himself from all the loss that he's had in his life. And so everything that comes out of his mouth is funny. And that was challenging for me. This was like my attempt at writing the most funny sort of scenes that I could write.
You did. It's charming and it's humorous. It's really a beautiful combination. And I love that Irving had his own book club. At least he was suggesting the book, right? He was carrying the talk that night.
He has his book club. Yeah.
So I hope they read The Love Elixir of Augusta Stern next down there. They really should. We'll have to recommend to Irving. How about we check back with our book club members? They have a couple other questions for you, Lynda. So let's get over to Danielle.
They do. They have a couple more. So in the book, Augusta's father was very resistant to Aunt Esther's ways and herbal remedies. He called them superstitions and old wives' tales, but they seem to work. So Susan has this question for Lynda.
Are you surprised that holistic medicine isn't more mainstream today? And if so, are you hoping that a book like yours will bring it more to the attention and in the forefront?
Really it's interesting that she asked that question because as I was reading it and you were describing how they were creating these potions, I was kind of surprised that you don't see more of that in everyday medicine.
I feel like we do to certain degrees, right? Like there are so many people who are online sort of selling their skin. I feel like cosmetically, it's a place where we use it a lot.
And I also hear sometimes when people are creating an herbal tea, but they're adding ginger and they may be adding a few of the other things that you were talking about of the herbs. So I guess it is kind of It's something to think about, though, too. The 1920s, and now, of course, much has happened in the field of medicine. But I wouldn't be surprised that, you're right. You do see some of Augusta in a few people. You know what I loved about her, too, is that she did not want to retire. She would have kept going on as a pharmacist if they didn't force her out.
Yeah, she lies about her age for a very long time. And that was really, I took that little detail from my husband's great-grandmother's life, because she was working into her 80s and she lied about her age. She used to use whiteout on her pharmacy license and type over it and then photocopy it. And so she kept working, into her 80s. I mean, it's fun. You can't really do that today with everything's computerized, but back then you could.
The other thing about your book is that it gives us this beautiful power of second chances. And, a retiree in her 80s who might be reading this book is probably thinking, hey, there is love out there for me too, which is a really nice thing to think about. And for Augusta, it was nice for her to see Irving like that again. I'm sure for you it must have been nice to be able to create that relationship, because it wasn't so great at the very beginning.
No, at the beginning, no. They meet when they're young and something happens and you'll have to read the book. Readers will read the book to find out why. And Augusta really shuts herself off from relationships, from connection to people for so many years, which you might think, in one way is tragic, but it's also, she has a really fascinating career. She has a very full life. It was one of the things that I sort of wanted to highlight in the book, that a woman doesn't need to be married and have children necessarily to have that full life. And then when she is older, she is really able to appreciate finding people again. And not only does she find Irving, but she makes new friends, which she hasn't done for a very long time. So I feel like it's important to remember that. You're never too old to make a new friend.
Yes. And we have one last question from our book club members. Let's get back over to Danielle.
We do, but I just have to say I love that, because it's Augusta says you can't stop living. She lived a full life and she discovered another life, another chapter. And that's like a big lesson for everybody, 80, 70, 60, 50, whatever. It's a good lesson. Okay, so our last question comes from a reader named Anissa, who has read all of Lynda's books. And she says Lynda has gotten better with each one. Talk about growing and growing and growing. So Anissa also said during our Zoom meetup that she noticed a change in Lynda's writing style.
My question is that your last two books, The Augusta Stern and The Matchmaker's Gift, both included some magical realism. And I'm curious as to what made you decide to put those in your books. Thank you.
That's a great question, Lynda.
It is. Yeah, my first two books were sort of more serious. They were family sagas. They didn't have the humor or the magical realism included in them that Matchmaker's Gift and Augusta have. And I think I had always wanted to try it, though. I had always wanted to put some of that in my writing, because I love reading fantasy. I love reading historical fantasy. I love reading all kinds of books with magical realism. Alice Hoffman is one of my absolute, favorite writers. And I was lucky with Matchmaker's Gift. It was the right time for it. I hadn't intended on even writing a book about a matchmaker at all. And it was COVID, and the idea happened, and magical realism really worked so perfectly with that story. And I think it's also that idea of COVID being such a time when we needed a little bit of magic, right? I mean, it was such a dark time for so many people all over the world. And so I feel like it came at a good time. I feel really grateful and lucky that I was able to do it, that my editor was kind enough to let me play with it. And then with Augusta Stern, I wanted to do it again.
I feel like it's a perfect combination, especially in this book and The Matchmaker's Gift. It's done so beautifully.
Thank you.
So speaking of, what are you working on now?
Oh my goodness, I'm a little behind.
Look at us. We want to know, what's the next one? What's the next one? You're still on book tour for this one.
I know, I'm still working on this one. I'm a little bit behind, but it's going, I can't say too much about it yet, but it's going to be a very bookish book. And it's about someone who sort of has a recurring dream about a book, and she is at a point in her life where she has a lot of questions about her identity and who she is and her family. And in this dream, always she sees the same book, but she can't see the title. And before she wakes up, someone says, "This is the book that saved your life."
How about
And so she's searching for it.
Well, we're in already. When's it out? When's it out? We want to grab it off the bookshelf. Well, Lynda, it was just so great talking with you, and really delving into your writing process and your research. It's been so lovely. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to meet Augusta Stern and to meet you as well.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I absolutely loved being here and talking with you and listening to the readers' questions. So I'm so grateful to you.
Yes, and we're grateful to have you. So thank you very much. And we are getting ready to kick off Club Calvi in 2025. More on that when we come back. But before we head to break, another look into the archives with Lynda and C.O. Bigelow.
There's some famous people in this book. I specifically this morning was able to find one that I think is super cool. We're in New York, so famous New Yorker. This is Miss Condé Nast. So
it's so fascinating, and we want to know what she bought, but we can't.
We don't.
So good, but we don't know.
You know, again, I'll point out her balance is about $15,000, whereas most people are like $93,000, $1,000.
That's $15,000 at that time. What was?
Yeah. Hopefully, some really good face cream and makeup.
How wonderful to hear from Lynda.
That was fabulous.
I know. And Danielle, I cannot believe we're coming to the end of a year of Club Calvi. And take a look at the books we've read this year. Thank you to you, our readers, our viewers who voted for all of them. We so appreciate you.
I mean, Mary, we had such a good selection. We had literary fiction, historical fiction, mysteries, thrillers. 8 books means we had 24 fic picks, and they're all worth considering to read. And you can learn more about them at our website, clubcalvi.com.
And we'd love for you to join our Facebook group too, if you'd like. From everyone at the CBS New York Book Club, thank you for being a part of it. We will see you in January with the new top 3 fic picks for your vote. Until then, we wish you a very happy holiday and Happy New Year to all of you.
Happy New Year.